Hello and welcome to this look at urban geography. On the screen in front of you is an overhead view of Baltimore's Inner Harbor. The Inner Harbor area has been the center of economic and social life for the Baltimore metropolitan area for over 3 centuries. As we go through our discussion today, I want you to think about your hometown or your local metropolitan community and think about ways in which it's changed over time. Later on, we're going to look at different revolutions and see how our urban spaces have evolved. Baltimore was an industrial city that grew during the second urban revolution, but has evolved into a post-industrial city in the third urban revolution. But when we look at cities, we want to focus on a few key topics. We can ask ourselves, why do we study cities? Well, one, which is really important, is that over 50% of the population around the world today lives in cities. So over half of our people live in urban areas. Now, when we study a topic like human geography and we look at culture, we can start to identify then that over half of our data set, people, live in urban areas. In a place like North America, that number is significantly higher. Over 85% of people in the United States live in metropolitan areas. Cities are also our economic powerhouses. About 98% of the US GDP is derived from activities occurring in our cities. And it's also the center of social life, culture, behavior, political movements. Cities are incredible in their ability to bring about change, to allow people to play out different experiences. So when we look at cities, we often talk about the spaces, meaning that we could draw a perimeter around a city. We could look at the types of activities that are taking place. But we also need to recognize that our cities are also very important places, areas that hold a significance beyond just that space. The graphic on the screen in front of you shows the growth in urban populations from 1950 through this decade and projected into the mid 21st century. You'll notice that on the left-hand side, the North American line is much higher, noted in orange. But as we move through the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century, we see rapid growth occurring in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America as the world is urbanizing. So again, the United States has been urbanized for over a century. And when we talk about urbanized, we're talking about half of our population living in metro areas. But the rest of the world has caught up, and the rest of the world is urbanizing much more rapidly than what we find in North America and Europe, our oldest urban areas. We're going to take a look at 3 different revolutions. We're going to answer the questions when, where, and why. Our first urban revolution occurred about 6,700 years ago, or 4,700 before current era. Now, the earliest settlements date back almost 11,000 years, but the first forms that actually reflect a city are about 6,700 years old. These early cities were found in an area known as the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent today extends from the eastern Mediterranean countries like Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and extend into modern-day Iraq and Iran, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, at the foothills of the Zagros Mountains in Turkey. This area provided a very favorable climate, and what we recognize is that the last ice age ended a little over 10,000 years ago, and the climate started warming around the world. And certain places found that their climate was especially hospitable to supporting a group of people coming together and settling in sedentary locations. So we're going to look at 4 theories as to why cities started popping up. What we need to understand is that our first cities that we recognize occurring in an agglomeration, meaning a cluster of cities, were found here in the Fertile Crescent. But we also saw early cities pop up in other parts of the world. parts of the world that at this time would have had no contact with those cities and city-states in the Fertile Crescent. So we have four explanations as to why cities started occurring when they did and where they did. So when we look at these theories, the first is agriculture surplus, meaning that as the climate was improving, our farm techniques were improving, our yields were greater, and we were creating a surplus amount of food. So farmers weren't only growing to feed their household, they were now able to grow and feed others. So when you could grow more food than you could consume, you're feeding other people, which allows them to take part in other activities. We also see that religion played a big role or was found in our early cities. And religion, different than what we practice today with our Semitic faiths or our major Asian faiths, religion in this case looks at individuals who were able to describe the patterns throughout a year. Individuals who were relatively charismatic, could bring people together, explain again the unknown, and the unknown at this time being the seasonal changes that occur throughout a year. Tracking the Earth's space, Earth's place in space. So understanding what's happening around us, being charismatic, bringing people together. The oldest profession is often referred to as a priest. The third theory is defense, meaning that a group of people had something, a commodity that was of value, and they wanted to defend that. And the fourth is trade. Trade goes hand in hand with surplus. Somebody is producing more than they consume of something, and then they are able to trade that for something else, whether it is wheat or fish or pottery or something that is tangible and produced. These four theories help explain our early cities. And what we recognize is that in nearly all of our early cities, at least 3 or 4 of these are present. So it's a little bit difficult to understand or to determine which came first in each example. But again, we do see signs of ag surplus, religion, defense, and trade present in our early cities. Our early cities in the first urban revolution were known as city-states, meaning they were small, confined, self-governed spaces, usually of a few thousand people. The image on your right shows the spatial makeup of these early city-states. Most of our city-states were walled to keep people out. People wanted to be in the city. So within the city, it held more prestige. The closer you are to the middle, the closer you are to an elite group. So individuals wanted to be within the city. Those outside the city lived in what's called the hinterland, and the hinterland provided for the city. A city grew its power and wealth by extracting what was grown or produced outside the city walls. So a city that was in the middle of a really fertile area would hold a lot of wealth and power because it produced a great deal of commodities like wheat, able to feed a lot of people. Storage in defense of that wheat led to a different power hierarchy. So those that were in control of storing and protecting and distributing the wheat would have been those that were in power. So in our early city-states, the center of the city was usually a compound. Temples, buildings, storehouses, homes to the elite groups. So our earliest cities, found in different areas, reflected these spatial patterns. The term temenos reflects that elite compound. It's a term used to describe that center of these ancient city-states. So the example on your screen now reflects a city-state dating back 5, 6, 7,000 years. This first revolution extended for thousands of years. The image on your screen now looks at ancient Rome, which falls into this first urban revolution because of the hierarchy, because of the theory of development of the city. Ancient Rome was a walled city. At the middle of the city, we had elite groups. We had compounds. We had a very stratified social organization. Rome also based its wealth on hinterland extraction. Rome's hinterland extended throughout modern day Europe into West Asia and into North Africa. Rome, again, reflects the attributes of cities in this first urban revolution, just on a much more massive scale. Here's an image of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century current era, and you see how vast its hinterland was. The hinterland, again, is the area where Rome was able to extract its resources, much greater than simply food and simply providing for your local population. Rome was able to extract food. It was able to extract goods, wool, dyes, different types of foods that couldn't be found or grown in the Italian peninsula. So this was a massive, fully evolved version of a city-state that started in the first urban revolution. Towards the end of the first urban revolution, the social dynamics began to change a little bit. Our merchant cities reflect the end of this revolution. In our merchant cities, we started to see trade, which differed from the hinterland extraction that provided the resources and power to our early city-states. Along with trade, we also saw the growth of citizenship. So people had a little more determination in their path. They were citizens of a city. They were citizens of a state. They were not just subjects of that space. And capitalism began to grow. Remember, we started to move away from simply hinterland extraction, conquering different areas and taking the resources out. Trade was evolving. Trade, which was in its infancy during the city-state era, began to evolve, began to be a key player in the growth of our cities. The spatial organization in our cities also began to change. Our ancient cities were still the footprint upon which our merchant cities were built, but our merchant cities, instead of having that temenos or that elite compound in the center, they had a guild and a marketplace. A marketplace now at the center of a city means that this is where people can trade. This is where people can interact, pursue markets, pursue capitalism. The guild hall, a guild is the mix between a union and an artisan workshop. And the guild now is at the center where people are producing, people are creating. They're not just defending. They're not just distributing. They're not just the center of local religion. They are now pursuing craft, trade, capitalism. And what we found was a tremendous amount of small cities growing at the end of the first urban revolution. So the first urban revolution introduced people coming together, forming these social organizations of human beings. And at the center, we saw again religion, defense, ag surplus, trade. Early on, for thousands of years in this revolution, the goal of the city and the state was to simply extract from the hinterland. But then at the end of this revolution, we see how trade, citizenship, individual opportunity begins to grow in a grassroots movement. The first urban revolution contributes some ideas to future revolutions, primarily this idea of trade and capitalism, which helped further evolve our cities beginning in the second revolution.